And welcome to this lore video about the dragon language of Nern, Dovahzul. Now, before we begin, I have to warn you. This is not a guide on how to learn the language. If you're looking for that sort of thing, I would recommend sticking around to the end of the video, where I can point you to some useful sources. That said, I hope you will enjoy this video. So a few months ago I made a video on Gel, the language of the Argonians. There I discussed how Gel is inherently different to any other language on Tamriel. Men and Mer all have their own languages, however, all of those languages are easily learned, as in the root, all languages on Tamriel originate in an old Elnophax, which is the language used by the Elnophae, who were the precursor race to all the other intelligent races on Tamriel. Meaning that all languages are essentially branches of Old Elnophax, except for Gel, the language of the Argonians, which was created by the Argonians and the Hist, who do not come from the Elnophae and are a completely different branch of creatures. That said, the dragons do originate from the Elnophae. Some say that they are literally the children of Akatosh, with Alduin being the firstborn. I'm personally a follower of this theory, which states that when the gods created Mundus, the mortal plane with Tamriel on it, they had to procreate in order to survive. This theory states that from this procreation the Elnophae came, and that there were different types of Elnophae, with the children of the god Akatosh being dragons. Now, as an extension of this theory, this states that Old Elnophax was spoken by all types of Elnophae, as it came from the language of the gods. However, as the types of Elnophae differentiated themselves from each other, they got isolated, and that eventually led to the languages being evolved into the many different languages now present on Tamriel and Nern as a whole. The dragon language is one of the languages that has evolved from the old Elnophax language. We can conclude this on the fact that in its basis it's very similar to other languages. The dragon language first and foremost uses an alphabetic script, meaning that the language is written using loose letters, just like all Elvish languages, human languages on Tamriel, Yokudan script and Akaviri script. So it's not an iconographic script, meaning that it doesn't use pictures for words, but instead makes up words using different letters. Secondly, this language uses a lot of the same grammar rules as the other languages, meaning that sentence structure and the way of speaking is also very similar to other languages. Now, other than of course using other words, there are some things that differentiate this language from other languages. First of all, its alphabet is different from the common human alphabet, or the Latin alphabet in our universe, as it contains 35 different symbols or letters which convey sounds. 25 of these symbols basically convey the same sounds as those in the Latin alphabet, having a symbol for every letter in the Latin alphabet from A to Z, with an exception of the letter C, which is not represented. However, even then, the letter C is represented in Elder Scrolls Legends, however there it's used in a very doubtful way, but technically we also have a symbol for the letter C, it's just not in the original lore. So when we count the letter C, there would be 36 different symbols. In addition to that, there are 9 other symbols which are used for the sounds that we need 2 letters for in the Latin alphabet. Like for example the sound UR, so U and R, has its own symbol. There are also some symbols for double vowels, like for example 2 U's, so UU, which are essentially stronger sounding U's, but having their own symbol to them now. The symbols themselves also have a very interesting story to them, as they basically came to be when the dragons would carve their words into the stone. The prevailing theory is that the dragon would hold its thumb of their claw in one spot and then have the other fingers of the claws circle around it while carving it out. The grammar of the language also has some distinct differences. There are for example no apostrophes, and the language tends to place prepositional phrases earlier in the sentence than in English, and it does not have a tense. Also, if a word is pluralized, like the word slave, which is R, you have to basically place another of the last letter at the end and then place an E at the end. So to say, if you want to say slaves instead of slave, you say are instead of R, if that makes sense. There are also a lot of words that you combine to make different words, which we see for example a lot in ancient languages in our world. This means that to invent a new word you combine 2 pre-existing words. Now, an interesting quality of this language is that it contains power. When spoken by the dragons or gifted individuals, speaking the language can turn into materialized power. This is what we call shouts. For example, when you speak the word for fire, yol, You can essentially breathe fire if you know its true meaning. That's what we call the power of the Thu'um. With each word which carries power, a true shout requires 3 words to unlock its full potential. Take for example Fus Ro Da, basically the most well-known shout of all of Skyrim. With only Fus, you can push an enemy slightly and make them stagger, but the true power unlocks with all 3 words, Fus Ro Da. For dragons, learning the language is basically intuitive, and they can pick the language up easily and share in the knowledge of others to learn the true meaning behind the word, and unlock the power of the Thu'um for themselves. This is also something that we can see with the Dragonborn, as they essentially have the soul of a dragon. However, for regular mortals, learning this is very hard, and it requires years of study and meditation. In ancient times, when the dragons ruled over humanity, only the dragons and their most trusted priests knew how to use the words of power, and knew how to use the Thu'um and learn the true meaning behind the words. However, during the Dragon War, the dragon Parthenax, as instructed by the goddess Kain, taught mankind how to use the power of the Thu'um, causing the Dragon War to shift in the humans' favor. During this time, humanity even crafted its own shout, born out of the hatred for the dragons, using the 3 words which were basically incomprehensible to the dragons. Yor, Za, Frul, or Mortal, Finite, Temporary, which was their most powerful weapon against the dragons, as they could not comprehend these words, as the dragons themselves are at their core immortal, eternal and everlasting. So essentially this shout is the complete opposite of what a dragon is supposed to be, and basically is a very powerful weapon against them when used as a shout. Dragons themselves are also named in the dragon language. Unlike with most mortals, the names of dragons are very important. They often come in 3 or 2 words in Dovahzul, which together characterize the dragon who has that name. Some in-universe scholars say that the dragon's way of naming things is the most precise description of one's soul and character. The name of a dragon generally depicts with certain precision how that dragon acts or looks like. Real-world names can also be translated as Dovahzul names. For this, we need to know the etymological meaning of that name, in other words, what the name means in the language that it originated in. Let's take for example a very common name, for example the name John. The name John comes from Hebrew and it means grace and mercy of God. If we wanted to translate it to Dovahzul, we had to take the key words from the name, in this case the words God, grace and mercy. In Dovahzul, the equivalent words are Ra, Dun, Az. Putting them together we have Radenas, which is the Dovahzulic version of John. Technically, you should be able to do this the other way around too. So for example, Alduin, whose name is comprised of 3 words, Al-Du-In, has destroyer, devour and master as its literal translation, usually spoken as master who destroys and devours. So if there's for example an Hebrew, Arabic, Spanish or German name which has master who destroys and devours as its meaning, you can find out Alduin's real name in our languages. To be fair, I did some googling and could not find a real world name with that meaning behind it, but if anyone is able to find it, please let me know in the comments. I would find it hilarious if Alduin's real world name would turn out to be Gilbert or something. I mean, please let me know if you find anything out. Each dragon has their own name which basically characterizes themselves, and so do the dragon priests. However, the dragon priest names are usually 1 word as opposed to the dragon's 3. Think for example about the priest Ragot, which means anger, or Valok, which means guardian. Now, a little disclaimer, we have no idea whether these were their names or the names of their masks, which were bestowed upon them by the dragons. But this is basically the only thing that we know them by. That said, I think this was a pretty good rough overview of the dragon language. First of all, allow me to thank Mr. Nerddragon, who is Brazil's self-proclaimed top expert of Dovahzul, for helping me with this video. He knows a lot more about the dragon language than I do, and he compiled a whole document of all dragon names and their meanings for me, which I made available for you to read in the top of the description if you're interested in that. In addition to that, if you're interested in learning the dragon language yourself, I recommend checking out Thu'um.org, which is a great website containing all resources you might need. My friend Mr. Nerddragon also has very much endorsed that site, so if you're remotely interested in it, then I really recommend checking out that link to the site in the description as well, as it was a great resource for this video too. Before I end this video, allow me to vocally thank my top patrons, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Metalloid1v1, Hayden Barnes and Gabriel Binda. Those guys, along with the other people on screen, are the people who make my weekly lore videos possible. That said, if you enjoyed this video, consider sticking around for the next one, which drops next Thursday, or check out one of my other Elder Scrolls lore videos. I have a great library of them by now, and if you just look at the playlist, then you can find a lot of them. Also, if you want personal contact with me, there are my Instagram and Discord in the description. And with that behind us, there's nothing else left for me than to wish you a very great week, and I will see you next Thursday in a new Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye!